We all tell ourselves that we'd notice if something were wrong, that we'd catch the small shifts, like a bad feeling before a storm hits. But the truth is, when you're in the middle of it, the changes feel so small, so insignificant, that you convince yourself it's nothing. That's how it was with me and Olivia. Olivia and I met at a mutual friend's party 8 years ago. She was magnetic, confident in that quiet way, with a laugh that made you feel like you'd earned a small prize. She was already deep into her master's in mathematics, brilliant as hell, but somehow managed to stay grounded. We got married 5 years later. I loved being her husband, proudly introducing her as my wife, the math genius. And for a long time, life felt easy. But now, sitting at our kitchen table, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping between my fingers, like trying to hold on to water. She was in the living room, typing on her laptop, and from where I sat, I could hear the steady rhythm of the keys. It sounded innocent, but for weeks now, it had felt like a wall between us. The first thing that had caught my attention was how often she brought up her students. Olivia worked as a private math tutor, mostly advanced placement prep for high school seniors aiming for Ivy League schools. She'd always talked about her students here and there, usually funny little stories or moments she was proud of. But lately, she'd been mentioning one name more often than the rest: Darcy. Darcy wasn't one of her usual clients. I remember the first time Olivia talked about her. It was casual, tossed into a conversation while I was making dinner. She's sharp, like scary smart. But you can tell she doesn't trust herself yet, she'd said, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Another math prodigy? I joked, tossing onions into the pan. Olivia laughed. More like a survivor. She's been through a lot. That should have been the first clue. Olivia never got too personal about her students. Sure, she cared about them, but it was always professional. Helping kids reach their full potential was her motto. But with Darcy, it was different. The next thing that set me off was how often Olivia started staying late after lessons. She'd text me things like, "Running late. Darcy needed extra help with her exam strategy." At first, I didn't question it. Olivia was dedicated to her job, always had been. But the frequency of those late lessons started to gnaw at me. And then there were the canceled date nights. One Friday, I had booked us a table at this nice Italian place downtown, a real treat since we'd both been swamped with work. But an hour before our reservation, she sent me a text. "I'm so sorry. Darcy's having a really tough day. Can we reschedule?" That was the first time I felt real resentment toward this girl I'd never met. I canceled the reservation, sat at home with a frozen pizza, and tried to tell myself not to overreact. But the signs kept piling up. Olivia started dressing nicer. For lessons. Not in a flashy way, but I noticed the small things. New perfume, a new blouse in a color she didn't usually wear. And then there was her phone. She'd never been secretive about her phone before. It would sit out on the kitchen counter or nightstand, notifications popping up like they didn't matter. But one night, as we were watching a movie, her phone buzzed and she grabbed it so fast it made my head snap up. I glanced over her shoulder as she texted back quickly, her face lit up by the screen. I couldn't see the name, but I saw a heart emoji at the end of the message. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Olivia looked over, startled, like I'd caught her sneaking out past curfew. "Just Darcy," she said, turning the phone over, screen down. I forced a laugh. "Since when do you text your students like that?" "She's different. It's hard to explain," she muttered, her eyes darting away. She shifted on the couch, pulling her legs up like she was shielding herself from me. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Olivia breathed softly beside me. The heart emoji looped in my brain like a broken record. I wasn't sure which possibility scared me more, that she was emotionally invested in a student, or that she might be attracted to her in a way I hadn't even considered. The thought hit me like ice water. What if she's not who I thought she was? What if she's attracted to women? I felt ridiculous even thinking it. Olivia and I had been together for years. There was no way I wouldn't have noticed something like that. But doubt doesn't need proof. It just needs a crack to slip through. And now I couldn't stop wondering. The following week, I decided to pay closer attention. I wasn't proud of it. It felt like I was betraying her trust. But I needed answers. I needed to know if I was just being paranoid or if there really was something slipping away between us. The next morning, as Olivia grabbed her keys for another lesson with Darcy, I kissed her on the cheek, feeling the familiar warmth of her skin. "Have a good lesson," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. She smiled, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, hesitation, maybe guilt. I couldn't be sure. As the door closed behind her, I grabbed my coat and decided to follow. I didn't plan to follow her. It wasn't some premeditated decision where I mapped out the streets and plotted my next move. It just happened. 1 second, I was standing by the door, watching her leave, and the next, I was grabbing my keys like a man possessed. Her car pulled out of the driveway, and I waited a beat before easing out behind her. My heart was thudding in my chest so loudly that I half expected to hear it echo through the car. She turned onto Main Street, heading toward the nicer side of town, the area with the upscale coffee shops and yoga studios. I felt a weird sense of relief. Maybe she's just taking Darcy out for a coffee or something innocent. But then again, since when did tutoring sessions involve cafes? Her car slowed near a small bookstore that doubled as a coffee shop. I pulled into a spot across the street, trying not to look obvious as I watched her step out of the car. She wasn't dressed, like someone meeting a teenager for a study session. She wore that fitted navy blue blouse I loved and a pair of black jeans that made her legs look impossibly long. Subtle, but put together. Almost too put together. I sank lower in my seat as she walked into the shop. I waited a few minutes, convincing myself I was overreacting. But curiosity and fear pushed me out of the car. I crossed the street and paused by the glass window, trying to get a look inside without being too obvious. There she was, sitting at a corner table with her back to me, and across from her, Darcy. Darcy wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined someone shy and bookish, maybe awkward with glasses and a messy bun. But this girl didn't fit that description at all. She had short, almost platinum blonde hair and a sharp, confident look about her. She was wearing an oversized hoodie, slouched in her chair with a sort of effortless cool that screamed rebel. Olivia was laughing at something Darcy said, the kind of laugh that came from deep in her chest, the kind I hadn't heard in months. I felt like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see, like I'd wandered into a scene meant for someone else. Darcy leaned forward, reaching across the table to adjust something on Olivia's necklace. It was such an intimate gesture that my stomach twisted. Olivia's eyes softened as she let Darcy's fingers brush against her collarbone. I turned away, heart hammering, and leaned against the brick wall of the bookstore. My hands were shaking. Am I losing my mind? I asked myself. She's her student, for God's sake. Maybe Olivia just feels protective of her. But there was no ignoring the tension between them. It wasn't the type of affection a teacher had for a student. It felt heavier, deeper. I forced myself to take a breath, then peeked back inside. Darcy was talking again, her face animated, and Olivia was hanging on to every word. I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. There were these little pieces of her life, stories, moments, that she was sharing with someone else, someone who wasn't me. I stayed there for another 10 minutes until the weight of my own humiliation crushed me. I couldn't stand there any longer like some voyeur. I crossed back to my car, slammed the door shut, and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I couldn't think straight. When Olivia came home later that afternoon, I was still at the dining room table, nursing a cold cup of coffee. She walked in, and her face lit up with the same warm smile she always gave me after her sessions. I hated how much I wanted to believe that everything was okay, that I was the one reading too much into things. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag by the door. She came over and kissed my cheek. I forced a smile. "Hey!" She didn't notice how stiff I was, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. "Darcy's making huge progress," she said as she grabbed a glass of water. "You should see her confidence now. It's incredible." The way she said Darcy's name sent a jolt through me. I wanted to ask her everything. "Do you even know how it looks? What's really going on between you two?" But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded like a fool. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, pretending everything was fine while my mind ran wild. Every smile Olivia gave me felt like a lie. Every glance in my direction felt empty. By the time we got into bed that night, I couldn't take it anymore. As we lay there in the dark, I broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like we've been off lately?" I asked, keeping my voice as casual as I could. Olivia turned toward me, her face half lit by the glow of her bedside lamp. "Off how?" "I don't know. Just distant, maybe." She frowned, reaching for my hand. Her fingers felt cool against my skin. "Babe, we've both been busy. Work's been intense for me, and I know it's been the same for you." I studied her face in the dim light. She sounded sincere, maybe even a little hurt. But there was something else there, a flicker of guilt. "Are you sure that's all?" "It is?" I asked quietly. She hesitated for half a second. Most people wouldn't have caught it, but I did. "Of course," she said softly, her grip on my hand tightening. She leaned in and kissed me, a slow, lingering kiss that should have been reassuring, but only made me feel more lost. When she finally pulled away, she whispered, "I love you." I swallowed hard, trying to push back the knot in my throat. "I love you too." She turned over and fell asleep quickly, her breathing slow and steady. But I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering if everything we'd built was about to come crashing down. Because deep down, I knew that whatever Olivia had, with Darcy, it wasn't something I could just explain away. I didn't want to believe it, but I could feel it in my gut. Our marriage was standing on a fault line, and I wasn't sure how much longer it could hold. The next few days felt like I was living in two parallel worlds. On the surface, life went on as usual. Breakfast together, quick kisses goodbye before work, polite conversations over dinner. But beneath that thin veneer of normalcy, I was unraveling. Every time Olivia smiled at me, I questioned whether it was real or just a mask. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself, but my thoughts always circled back to the same place. Was I paranoid, or was something really happening between her and Darcy? And if it was, what did that mean for us? By Thursday, I'd convinced myself that I needed more information. I wasn't proud of it, but I felt like a man drowning, grasping for anything to keep me afloat. That afternoon, I was sitting in my car outside Olivia's office, something I'd never imagined myself doing. Her tutoring sessions usually ended around 4 p.m., and I knew Darcy was her last student of the day. I told myself I just needed to see how they interacted outside of that coffee shop, without the cozy setting and the soft music. Maybe it would put my mind at ease. At exactly 4:10, the door to the tutoring center opened. Olivia stepped out first, her bag slung over her shoulder, laughing at something behind her. Darcy followed, wearing another one of those oversized hoodies, this time with the sleeves pushed up. She had this nonchalant air about her, like the whole world was background noise she barely noticed. They walked to Olivia's car together, and Darcy leaned casually against the driver's side door as they kept talking. I strained to hear, but I was too far away. All I could see was Olivia's face, lit up with that same expression I used to think was reserved for me. That quiet warmth, like whoever she was looking at was the center of her universe. Darcy said something that made Olivia laugh again, and then she reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind Olivia's ear. I froze. The gesture was quick, almost subtle, but it was intimate in a way that felt like a punch to the gut. Olivia didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She just smiled and said something back before unlocking her car. Darcy stepped back, giving a lazy wave as Olivia climbed in. Olivia drove off, and Darcy walked in the opposite direction, earbuds in, as if the world had just handed her another ordinary afternoon. But for me, everything had shifted. I sat in the car for a long time after they left, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers went numb. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It wasn't just a bad feeling I could shake off. There was something between them, something real, and that scared me more than anything. When I got home, Olivia was already there, chopping vegetables for dinner like it was just another Thursday. She looked up when I walked in and gave me that same familiar smile. "Hey, you're home early," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "Yeah." My voice felt hollow in my own ears. I kissed her on the forehead out of habit and moved toward the fridge, grabbing a beer. "Long day?" she asked, turning back to the cutting board. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to read her face. It looked so normal. Too normal. "Something like that," I muttered before taking a long sip. We ate dinner in relative silence that night. Olivia tried to fill the gaps with small talk, work updates, random bits about our friends, but I could barely respond. I kept thinking about that moment in the parking lot, the way Darcy had reached for her, the way Olivia had let her. After dinner, Olivia went to the bedroom to fold some laundry, and I stayed behind, staring at the empty wine glass in front of me. The room felt too quiet, like the silence was pressing in on me. I needed to know more. I glanced at her phone, sitting on the kitchen counter. She usually never left it unattended for long, but now, there it was, right in front of me. My pulse quickened as I reached for it. The screen lit up with her lock screen, a photo of the two of us from last summer, smiling on a hiking trail. We looked happy, untouched by whatever this was. Her phone was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. We didn't have secrets, or at least we hadn't before. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second before I punched in the numbers. It unlocked. I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling as I opened her messages. I scrolled past names I recognized, her mom, her friends from work, until I found it. Darcy. There wasn't anything blatantly damning at first. Just a lot of back and forth about their sessions, scheduling, random jokes. But the further I scrolled, the more personal the messages became. Darcy. Thanks for listening today. You're the only person I feel safe talking to. Olivia. I'm always here. You know that. I kept scrolling. My chest felt tight, like the room had shrunk around me. Darcy. Sometimes I wish I'd met you sooner. Maybe things would have been different. Olivia. We can't change the past. But we have now. The next message made my stomach drop. Darcy. I miss you. Olivia. I miss you too. The words stared back at me like a neon sign. I closed the messages, my heart pounding. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to break something inside me. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and walked out to the backyard. The cool night air hit my face like a slap, but it didn't help. I couldn't breathe. I stood there, staring up at the sky, trying to make sense of everything. But no matter how I looked at it, one thing was clear. Olivia wasn't just mentoring Darcy. There was something else, something deeper, something she hadn't told me. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the full truth. Because whatever it was already changing everything. The weekend came and went in a haze. I couldn't remember what we talked about, what shows we half-watched on TV, or what errands we ran. I was there physically, but my mind was a million miles away, trapped in a loop of what I'd read on Olivia's phone. I miss you. It wasn't just words. It was proof. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of what I knew. But even worse was what I didn't know. I didn't know how deep this went or what it all really meant. Was it emotional? Was it something else? Every possibility tore at me in different ways. Olivia, for her part, seemed unfazed. She went about her day as if nothing had changed, like she wasn't carrying this huge secret in her pocket. How could she lie so easily? Or maybe she wasn't lying. Maybe she was just telling herself that whatever she had with Darcy wasn't wrong. By Monday morning, I was barely holding it together. Olivia was getting ready for her first tutoring session of the day, humming to herself as she gathered her things. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. She looked so normal, beautiful, sure, but in that familiar way that had once felt like home. Now, though, she looked like a stranger wearing my wife's face. "Big day today?" I asked casually, testing the waters. She turned around, surprised. "Not really, just the usual." "Why?" I shrugged, just curious. Her eyes narrowed, slightly like she was trying to gauge what I was getting at. "You've been quiet lately," she said, walking toward me. "Everything okay?" I wanted to scream. "No, everything's not okay. I saw the texts. I know about Darcy. I know you're slipping away from me." But the words got caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. "Just work stuff," I lied, forcing a weak smile. She nodded, accepting the excuse too easily, and leaned in to kiss me. I felt her lips brush against mine, soft and familiar. But it wasn't comforting anymore. It felt like I was kissing someone I no longer trusted. She pulled away, grabbing her bag. "I'll be home around 5, she said. "Let's order something for dinner tonight?" "Sure," I mumbled. She smiled again before heading out the door, leaving me standing there in the hollow silence of our kitchen. As soon as I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and sat at the dining table. I was done waiting for answers to fall into my lap. I Googled Darcy's full name. It didn't take long to find her Instagram. It was public, and her profile picture was her usual self. Short blonde hair, half smirking into the camera like she couldn't care less. Her bio read, "Figuring it out one day at a time." I scrolled through her photos. A lot of artsy shots. Sunsets, coffee cups, black and white photos of book pages. And then I froze. It was a post from a few weeks ago. A candid shot of 2 hands holding coffee cups on a cafe table, the same table I'd seen Olivia and Darcy sitting at. There was no caption, just a single red heart emoji. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. It wasn't concrete proof, but it felt like a punch to the gut. Darcy was memorializing their moments. Quiet, subtle, but undeniably intimate. My fingers hovered over the screen, debating whether to keep digging or to put the phone down and pretend I hadn't seen it. But then I noticed the comments. There were a few from friends, generic stuff like "love this" and "so cute." But one stood out. "Is this who I think it is?" And Darcy's reply? A winking emoji. I slammed my phone down on the table, the sound echoing through the empty room. The walls felt like they were closing in. Every inch of this house, our house, was filled with memories of us. Photos from trips we took, souvenirs from lazy weekends spent wandering through antique shops, the little sticky notes we used to leave each other on the fridge. And now, all I could see was cracks. The worst part was, I still hadn't confronted her. I didn't know how. Part of me wanted to catch her off guard, to force the truth out of her, but another part of me, the part that was terrified of losing her, kept holding me back. Because once the truth was out there, there'd be no going back. I needed advice. I needed someone to tell me what to do, someone who wasn't drowning in the middle of this mess like I was. I ended up calling Matt, my oldest friend. We'd known each other since college, and he'd always been the kind of guy who could cut through the bullshit and tell me the hard truth when I needed it. "Hey," he answered, his voice groggy. He was probably still in bed. It was his day off. "Hey, man, sorry if I woke you." "You okay?" he asked, his tone shifting when he heard my voice. "You sound off." I hesitated, unsure where to even start. I think something's going on with her." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath and told him everything, the late lessons, the texts, the cafe, Darcy. I left nothing out. When I finished, there was another long silence. "Jesus," Matt muttered finally. "I don't even know what to say." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice cracking. "Look, man, you need to talk to her. You're driving yourself insane over this." "You think I don't know that?" I snapped, immediately regretting my tone. "Sorry, I'm scared, Matt. What if she's really in love with her?" Matt exhaled on the other end. "Then at least you'll know. But living like this, it's gonna eat you alive." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. He was right. I was barely holding it together. "Talk to her," he said again, softer this time. "You owe it to yourself, man." We hung up a few minutes later, but his words kept circling in my mind. You owe it to yourself. When Olivia came home that evening, I watched her walk through the door, smiling at me like everything was perfectly fine. And that's when I realized something. I couldn't keep pretending. Whatever came next, I had to face it head on. Because the truth, no matter how ugly, was the only thing that could set me free. That night felt like a countdown to disaster. Every tick of the clock pushed me closer to the moment I knew was coming, the moment I'd ask Olivia for the truth. I had rehearsed it over and over in my head, imagining every possible outcome: denial, anger, tears, or worse, indifference. She was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, while I sat on the couch pretending to scroll through my phone. I wasn't even reading the screen. I was just waiting for the right second. But what even was the right second for something like this? There wasn't one. She walked over and sat down beside me, tucking her legs under herself like she always did. She sipped her wine and let out a tired sigh. "Today was exhausting," she murmured. "I swear some of these kids have no idea how to focus." I nodded absently. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I thought she'd hear it. She leaned into me slightly, and I felt a pang of sadness so deep it almost knocked me over. This was the woman I'd built my life with, the one I was supposed to grow old with. "Olivia," I said quietly, putting my phone down. She straightened up, sensing the shift in my tone. "What's wrong?" There it was, the moment I had to leap off the ledge. "I know about you and Darcy." Her face froze. The color drained from her cheeks, and her hand tightened slightly around the wine glass. For a second, I thought she might drop it. What do you mean?" she whispered. I swallowed hard. "I've seen the texts. I've seen the way you look at her." My voice cracked on the last word. "Olivia, I followed you to the cafe. I saw you with her." Her lips parted like she was about to speak, but nothing came out. The silence between us stretched long and unbearable. I pressed forward. "I don't care what you call it. Mentorship, friendship, whatever. But it's not normal. You don't text a student that you miss them. You don't let them touch your face like that." She closed her eyes for a long second, like she was trying to block out the reality of the moment. When she opened them, they were glassy with unshed tears. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That was it. That one sentence shattered everything. I felt the floor drop out from under me. So, it's true, I said, barely able to get the words out. You have feelings for her. Olivia's breath hitched, and she nodded. Just a small, trembling nod, but it felt like a gunshot. I stood up, pacing the room because I couldn't sit still anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. Jesus Christ, Olivia, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. She's a teenager. She's 18, she corrected softly, as if that made it better. That doesn't matter, I exploded, turning toward her. She's your student. You're supposed to be her teacher, her mentor, not this. Olivia finally stood up too, setting her wine glass down on the coffee table. She looked broken, smaller somehow. I know how it sounds. I know how it looks, she said, her voice shaking. But I wasn't grooming her or anything like that. It wasn't planned. I never set out to cross that line. It just happened. I laughed bitterly, not because it was funny, but because it was insane. It just happened? I repeated. What does that even mean? Tears started spilling down her cheeks, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I was too hurt, too angry. I was trying to help her, Olivia continued, wiping her face. She's been through hell. Her parents are a mess, and she's had no one to rely on. I just wanted to be there for her. And what? Somewhere along the way, you decided that being her emotional support wasn't enough? You wanted more? She flinched, like the words physically hurt her. I didn't want more, she said softly. But I started feeling things I didn't understand. And she felt it too. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The confirmation was worse than I'd imagined. So, you're in love? With her? I asked, my voice hollow. Olivia shook her head quickly. No, I don't know. I don't think so. She was pacing now, too, running her hands through her hair in frustration. It's not like that. It's not romantic the way you think. I care about her deeply, maybe too much. But it's not what you're imagining. Then why all the secrecy? Why the texts? Why the coffee dates? She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, but she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. I stopped pacing and looked at her, really looked at her. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the same person I married, or maybe she was. And I'd just never seen this side of her before. Do you even love me anymore? I asked, my voice cracking. Her eyes widened. Of course I love you. She stepped closer, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. No, I said, shaking my head. You don't get to say that, not after all of this. She took a step back like she'd been slapped. The room went quiet again, except for her quiet sobs. I felt like I was being split in two. Part of me wanted to hold her, to comfort her despite everything. But the other part of me wanted to walk out the door and never look back. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke. I can't do this, Olivia. Her face crumpled. Please don't say that. I need space. I need time to think. She nodded slowly, wiping her face again. Okay, she whispered. I grabbed my jacket and keys, barely able to look at her. My legs felt like lead as I walked to the door. I never meant to hurt you, she said softly, one last plea. I paused for a second, staring at the doorknob, but I couldn't turn around. Yeah, I said, my voice hollow. But you did. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the life I thought I knew. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours. The streets blurred past me, cars, streetlights, and storefronts melting into a meaningless stream of colors and noise. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't go home. Not yet. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot by a gas station and killed the engine. The silence hit me like a brick wall. I sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, trying to steady my breathing, but nothing felt steady. Everything was spinning. I replayed the conversation with Olivia over and over in my head. The way her voice had cracked, the way she'd admitted everything without even trying to fight it. I thought about the texts, the way Darcy had reached for her in the cafe, the way Olivia let her. How the hell did we get here? I'd spent years building a life with her. We'd talked about everything, dream vacations, future kids, stupid inside jokes that no one else would understand. And now, all of it felt like a lie. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, snapping me out of my thoughts. I picked it up and saw Olivia's name on the screen. She'd sent me a text. "Please come home. I'm scared. I can't lose you." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. But I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know who she was anymore. After a minute, I tossed the phone onto the seat and leaned my head back against the headrest. A knock on the window made me jump. I turned to see Matt standing there, holding a bag of snacks and a concerned look on his face. I realized with a jolt of surprise that I'd parked near the convenience store where he always stopped after work. I rolled the window down. "Dude, what the hell are you doing here?" he asked, tossing the bag into his car before leaning against mine. "You look like you've been hit by a truck." I let out a shaky breath. "It's bad, Matt." He nodded, folding his arms across his chest. "How bad?" "She admitted it," I said quietly. "She admitted everything." Matt's jaw tightened. Jesus. She said she didn't mean for it to happen, but she feels something for her. The words felt disgusting in my mouth, like they didn't belong to my life. And I don't know what to do. Matt rubbed the back of his neck, letting out a slow breath. "Look, I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers, but you can't carry this alone, man. Come crash at my place tonight. Get some sleep. You're not thinking straight?" I hesitated. The thought of going back to an empty house, or worse, walking back into that house and seeing Olivia, made my chest feel like it was caving in. "Yeah," I muttered. "Okay." Matt clapped, me on the shoulder. "Good. Let's go." We drove back to his place in silence, and by the time we got there, the exhaustion had fully set in. I felt hollow, like a shell of myself. He handed me a blanket and a pillow for the couch and left me alone. But sleep didn't come. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Matt's fridge humming in the kitchen and the occasional car passing outside. Memories flooded my brain, happy moments that felt like a cruel joke now. Our honeymoon in Maui, when Olivia got tipsy on pineapple cocktails and danced barefoot on the beach. The night we stayed up until 3 a.m. assembling IKEA furniture, laughing so hard we cried. I'd never thought for a second that she could betray me like this. And yet, here I was. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and the sunlight was streaming in through the window. I felt groggy and disoriented, like waking up after a nightmare only to realize it wasn't over. Matt was already in the kitchen making coffee. He glanced over at me. "You hungry?" I shook my head. "Not really." He nodded and poured. 2 cups anyway, setting one down in front of me. I stared at it, the steam curling up into the air. "So, what now?" Matt asked. "You gonna go back and talk to her?" I swallowed hard. I don't know. Part of me wants to just end it, pack my stuff and walk away. But the other part? The part that still loves her? My voice trailed off. Matt leaned forward. "Listen, man, nobody can tell you what to do here, but you deserve honesty, and you deserve to know the whole truth. If there's anything she's still hiding, you need to know before you make any big decisions." I nodded slowly. He was right. As much as I wanted to run, I couldn't leave with unanswered questions. After another hour of sitting in silence, I finally stood up and grabbed my jacket. "I need to go back," I said, more to myself than to Matt. "You sure?" "Yeah." I took a deep breath. "I need to hear the rest." Matt gave me a look that was equal parts sympathy and respect. "You know where I am if you need me." The drive back to the house felt surreal. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode. When I pulled into the driveway, Olivia's car was still there. I sat in the car for a minute, gathering the courage to walk through the front door. When I finally stepped inside, the house felt eerily quiet. Olivia was sitting at the dining table, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up when she saw me, her face a mixture of hope and fear. "You came back," she whispered. I nodded but didn't say anything. I walked over and sat down across from her, the weight of everything pressing down on us like a storm cloud. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She nodded, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "I know." There was no turning back now. Whatever came next, I had to know everything. The whole truth, no matter how much it destroyed me. The moment felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened and was pressing down on both of us. Olivia sat across from me at the dining table, clutching a mug of cold coffee like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to make her feel the same pain that had been ripping me apart since the moment I found out. But instead, I spoke calmly, too calmly. "I need the truth. All of it." She nodded, her eyes raw and tired. "Okay," she whispered. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "How long has this been going on?" Olivia looked down, at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger, a habit I'd always found endearing. Now it just made me sick. "It started a few months ago," she said, "after I started tutoring Darcy full-time. At first it was innocent. She needed someone to talk to, and I thought I could be that person for her." I let out a bitter laugh. "Innocent." "Right." She winced. "I know how it sounds. But it's true. I didn't cross any lines. At least, not at first." She paused, her voice catching. "But I got too close. I didn't even realize it at first. But I stopped, thinking of her as just a student." My stomach twisted. "And she stopped being just a student to you. You let her in, emotionally at the very least." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes." I clenched my fists to keep myself from breaking down. "Did it ever go further than that?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "Did you sleep with her?" Olivia's head shot up, and she shook it fiercely. "No. I swear to God it never got physical. I never wanted that. It wasn't like that." I stared at her, trying to read her face for any sign of a lie. But she looked completely broken, and deep down, I believed her. But that didn't make the betrayal any easier to swallow. "But you thought about it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, her silence confirming what I already knew. "I don't know," she whispered finally. "I was confused. She made me feel important, needed, like I was someone she couldn't live without." "And I didn't make you feel that way?" I asked bitterly. Olivia's face crumpled. "It's not the same," she said, wiping her tears. "With you, it's different. You know me. You see all the good and the bad, and you love me anyway. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I wasn't enough, not for you, not for anyone." I blinked, stunned. "So this is my fault now?" "No," she said quickly. "That's not what I'm saying. It's not your fault. It's mine. I was weak. I let myself believe that what Darcy and I had was harmless, but it wasn't. I crossed lines I shouldn't have. The anger I'd been holding back came surging to the surface. You think this is just about you crossing lines? You built a whole secret world with her, Olivia. You shut me out. You lied to me every single time you walked out that door. My voice cracked. Do you even understand what you've done? She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I watched her, torn between rage and devastation. Part of me wanted to hold her, to comfort her the way I always had when she was hurting. But I couldn't. Not this time. After a few minutes, she looked up, her face pale and streaked with tears. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I was stupid and selfish, and I've ruined everything. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you. I still love you even after everything. I closed my eyes, her words hitting me like a punch to the chest. I wanted to believe her so badly. I wanted to believe that love was enough to fix this. But then I thought about all the moments I'd spent wondering where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. I thought about the cafe, the texts, the way she let Darcy into a space that was supposed to belong to us. Do you love her? I asked, forcing myself to say the words. Olivia's eyes widened. No, she said quickly. I don't. I care about her, but it's not love. It was never love. Then what was it? I asked, my voice cracking. Because it sure as hell wasn't just tutoring. She shook her head, at a loss for words. It was an escape, she said finally. I felt lost, and being around her made me feel alive again, like I mattered. But it wasn't real. I see that now. I sat there, staring at her, trying to process everything. It felt like I'd been ripped in half. I gave you everything, I said softly. Everything. And this is what I get? Olivia sobbed harder. I know. I know. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. The weight of everything we'd said hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't know if I can do this, Olivia, I said, my voice barely steady. I don't know if I can forgive you. She stood too, panic flashing across her face. Please, she whispered, please don't give up on us. I took a step back, shaking my head. I need time, I need space. She nodded, wiping her face. Take all the time you need, I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door again, just like I had the night before. But this time, I knew it wasn't just about getting some air. This time, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to come back. As I stepped outside, the cold evening air hit me like a slap to the face. I stood there for a moment, staring out at the quiet street, my heart heavier than it had ever been. I knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. I drove without a destination, letting the hum of the tires on the pavement fill the silence in my mind. The streetlights blurred past me as my thoughts tangled into knots I couldn't untie. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart while I sat helplessly in the passenger seat. After about half an hour, I found myself parked at the edge of the lake on the outskirts of town. It was the same place Olivia and I used to go on lazy Sunday afternoons, back when things were simple and uncomplicated. I stepped out of the car and into the cold night air. The water was still, reflecting the moonlight like glass. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the horizon, trying to figure out how to move forward when everything felt so broken. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a split second, I thought it might be Olivia again, but it wasn't. It was Matt. Hey, just checking in. You okay? I sighed and texted back. I'm alive. A few seconds later, he responded. Want company? I thought about it for a moment, then replied, Not tonight, thanks. I slid my phone back into my pocket and let out a shaky breath. I didn't know if I wanted to talk to anyone yet. I wasn't sure if words could even help. The memories wouldn't stop. The good ones and the bad ones collided in my head like waves. I remembered the way Olivia used to grab my hand in the middle of a crowded room, like she couldn't stand being apart from me for even a second. I remembered the way she cried during our wedding vows, her hands trembling as she promised me forever. And I remembered how she looked at Darcy, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. That thought broke something in me. I sank onto one of the old wooden benches near the shore and buried my face in my hands. How had we gotten here? I kept asking myself the same question, over and over, but the answer wouldn't come. Maybe there wasn't an answer. Maybe people just broke sometimes. Maybe love wasn't enough to save two people from their own weaknesses. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, the cold seeped into my skin, and I knew I couldn't stay out there all night. By the time I got back to the house, it was close to midnight. The windows were dark, but I knew Olivia was still awake, waiting. I took a deep breath and walked inside. She was sitting on the couch in the dark, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at nothing. When she heard the door open, she looked up. At me, her eyes swollen and exhausted. "You came back," she said softly, her voice barely audible. I nodded but didn't move any closer. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. I could see the hope flickering in her eyes even after everything. She was still holding on to the idea that we could come back from this. And maybe part of me was too. But there was a difference between hope and reality. "I need to say something," I said, my voice cracking. She nodded, wiping her face. "Okay." I sat down across from her, keeping some space between us. "I've spent the last few hours trying to figure out if there's a way for us to fix this," I began. "And I don't know. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." Her face crumpled, but she didn't interrupt. She just listened. "I keep replaying everything in my head, the lies, the secrecy, the way you let someone else into the space that was supposed to be ours. And it's not just about the betrayal. It's the way you made me feel like I was the problem, like I wasn't enough." "You were never the problem," she whispered. "You've always been enough." I swallowed hard. "Then why wasn't I enough for you to stay loyal?" She had no answer for that. Her silence felt louder than any words she could have spoken. Tears filled her eyes again, and she reached for me. But I pulled back. "Don't," I said quietly. I can't do this right now." She nodded, her shoulders shaking, with quiet sobs. "I'm not saying it's over," I said, trying to steady my voice. "But I need time. Real time. Not just a few hours to calm down. I need to figure out who I am without you. I need to decide if I can forgive you, and even if I can, I don't know if I can forget." She nodded again, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll give you whatever you need." We sat in silence after that, the weight of everything pressing down on us like a tidal wave. Eventually, I stood up and grabbed a small duffel bag from the closet. I packed enough clothes for a few days, maybe a week. Olivia watched me the whole time, but she didn't say anything. When I was done, I walked to the door and hesitated. "I don't hate you," I said quietly, "but I don't know if I can love you the same way again." Her face broke all over again, and I had to look away before I lost whatever strength I had left. "I'll call you when I'm ready," I said. She nodded, unable to speak. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. The street was quiet, and the stars above felt distant and unreachable. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe I'd find a way to forgive her, or maybe this was the end of our story. But for now, all I knew was that I had to find myself. Again, who I was outside of this pain, outside of us. As I walked down the street, I felt the first fragile flicker of something I hadn't felt in days. Freedom. Not from her, necessarily, but from the constant loop of doubts and betrayals. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.